Roar!
Ew!
Hello and welcome to Midnight Readings. Today we'll be reading All Good Things, written by Cornet the Lesser. Hope you all enjoy! And with that, Luster stayed in Ponyville and made new friends. Her teacher was content at last, safe in the knowledge that her student had finally accepted that friendship is magic. Said Princess Twilight Sparkle, reigning ruler of Equestria. Twilight let her hoof linger on the final pages of her most treasured book. She gently closed it.
Is that it?
Spoke the pony to her right. Twilight turned to regard her latest student. Moonlight Radiance, a young unicorn filly. Her coat was a deep navy blue, and her mane was short and tomboyish. Yes, I'm afraid this is where the story ends. Twilight lifted her gaze to the surrounding palace gardens. They had settled in a quiet spot, far from the hustle and bustle of the castle. Well, this part of it anyway.
But I have questions! So many questions!
Objected Moonlight. She leapt to her hooves and stood in front of her mentor, her face contorting into a pout. Twilight could not help but roll her eyes. It seemed no pony was ever content with a happy ending. She put on her best teaching smile and looked down at her student. What questions, my faithful student?
What happened to the other princesses?
Blurted out Moonlight abruptly.
Or Discord?
Oh, the princesses? Twilight waved a dismissive hoof, as if she was speaking about the weather. They sailed into the west and were never heard of again.
Really?
Asked Moonlight, eyes wide in awe at the implications of such a statement. Where in the far west did they go? Some alicorn paradise hidden by a magical illusion, perhaps? Could such a place exist? The possibilities were endless to Moonlight. No.
Princess!
Protested Moonlight, her theories crushed in an instant. Twilight chuckled heartily and gently tousled Moonlight's hair, much to her student's annoyance. Apologies. It was just too easy of a tease to pass up.
You're not funny,
grumbled Moonlight, her cheeks puffed out with indignation. No, I'm hilarious, replied Twilight, laughing even more.
How did you ever end up as a princess?
Moonlight groaned, burying her head amongst her hooves. Do I need to read the book to you again? Twilight said sweetly, thoroughly enjoying the prolonged teasing of her student. You must lighten up, Moonlight. You'll never make friends poring over dusty books about old mares' tales, said Twilight in a sing-song voice.
What, like you?
Answered her student tersely. Twilight blinked. Point taken. Twilight shrugged her shoulders. The princesses in Discord got their own happy endings, I assure you, said Twilight, with as much finality as she could muster. But that is a story for another day.
But I want to know!
Cried Moonlight, falling to the ground, her expectation overcoming her. Now, my faithful student. There are still many lessons to come and many stories to tell, said Twilight, barely concealing the amusement in her voice. She placed the book underneath her wing and lifted her off the ground, all in good time. She turned to leave as it was the evening, and she would soon need to raise the moon. How fitting, the princess thought idly to herself as she beckoned Moonlight to follow.
Fine,
sighed Moonlight. She sat up, glancing at her teacher.
Can you at least tell me about your friends? What happened to them?
Twilight stopped and turned to face her student. The princess scratched her chin, deep in thought. Well, they lived long, happy lives filled with laughter and adventure. Moonlight looked at Twilight strangely, as if she'd been expecting a different reply. They died, whispered Moonlight. Twilight remained quiet for a moment. Yes, as most ponies do. Moonlight blinked rapidly, pursing her lips and clicking her tongue, as she often did when considering complicated topics. Twilight waited patiently, humming some nameless jingle she had picked up over the years. A lifetime of songs usually meant she would occasionally be stuck with the odd tune, even when she had long forgotten the lyrics. Was it, you know? You know, stuttered Moonlight. She seemed almost afraid to say any more, though Twilight's gentle nod encouraged her to do so.
It's just, you know, with how close you all were. I expected you a bit more, well, to be a bit more...
Moonlight awkwardly rubbed her hooves together. Sad? Offered Twilight. Moonlight nodded. Twilight patted the ground next to her and extended one of her wings outward. Moonlight rushed over to Twilight, taking her place beneath the large feathered appendage. She leaned in comfortably beneath her mentor's barrel, looking upward in anticipation of her teacher's answer. You'd think so, started Twilight, that I would wallow in despair at their passing, and for a while I did, I suppose. Twilight sighed, but she looked over the distant landscapes of the mountains that were her home. She could envision the outlying towns and cities that lay beyond the horizon, though her mind was instinctively drawn to a small little town nestled between the Everfree and the flatlands of Equestria's countryside. Twilight smiled as she remembered the thatched houses, gentle hills of her former home. But to linger in sadness is to do a disservice to the memory of their lives. So, I came to a different view with time.
What view?
Questioned Moonlight.
No offense, Princess, but I can't think of many positives.
Her student shook her head, though that quickly shifted to a more guilty look.
Sorry.
None taken, laughed Twilight. Her student was wise beyond her years. She just did not know it yet. It is something I grappled with myself for many years. In time, I think I've learned to remember without grief. Twilight closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the world. She swore. Even now, she could hear the tune of distant songs from long ago beyond the natural. I realize my friends lived on in me, through their experiences, through the love they gave me, and the happy memories, and the lessons that I carry with me, here. Twilight lifted a hoof and gently prodded her student's chest. Moonlight's eyes followed her teacher's movements.
In your heart?
Offered Moonlight. Twilight nodded. So, they are never far from me. Twilight's wing instinctively held her student tightly against her barrel. I sometimes talk to them, you know.
Impossible!
Said Moonlight as she touched her cheek. Her eyes darted back and forth as she searched her mind for the possibility of any such spell existing. No, no. Twilight gently patted her student's back. There is something greater than any magic. She then proceeded to lean down close to her student, until they were almost snout to snout, her voice but a whisper. If you ever wish to speak with those that are not here, just listen to your heart. Twilight winked knowingly, but you have to listen carefully, for the heart only whispers. Twilight unwrapped herself from Moonlight and rose to her full sight. She waited, her student's reply, looking carefully for her reaction.
So, if I listen to my heart, I can speak to the dead?
Said Moonlight eventually. That was not exactly my intention, said Twilight in surprise, before bursting into a fit of giggles. It's more metaphorical than that. She motioned with her wing for her student to follow. Moonlight eagerly jumped from her seated position to rejoin the princess at her side. You will understand when you're older, said Twilight.
My parents say that all the time too,
grumbled Moonlight. Twilight chuckled lightly into her hoof. Our lessons for today have come to an end. Twilight nodded her head towards the descending sun. We can pick back up on this topic at a later time. Unfortunately, there's a particularly important meeting I must attend tonight, and I simply cannot miss it.
But, Princess, you've nothing officially scheduled for this evening?
Said Moonlight as she followed the princess back to the castle. Oh, this is more important than some silly court meeting, scoffed Twilight. Her student looked at her with awe, as if Twilight had uttered something blasphemous. It's a meeting long overdue.
Can I come?
Asked Moonlight earnestly. Perhaps someday, my student. For a moment, Twilight swore that this was not Moonlight standing beside her, but a familiar purple unicorn looking back at her. One who once wondered what friendship could be. Perhaps someday. The moon hung low in Equestria's night. A shadow briefly passed over its surface as a figure took to the sky. Princess Twilight's great wings flapped as she ascended with speed that rivaled even the fastest flyers. She let the cool night air wash over her face as she beat her wings thrice and rose higher into the sky until she touched the soft underbelly of the clouds. There was something incredibly exhilarating about flying at night, with only the solace of her mind to accompany her. A far cry from the cries of the turbulent courts and their protocols. Twilight spun and adjusted course. She knew the trail well. She could probably do it with her eyes closed at this point. But then again, she would miss the rolling hills and flats that made up Equestria's countryside, doused in beautiful luminescent shades of blue. She never grew tired of seeing her country from up above amongst the clouds. It gave her perspective on what governing this great land meant. All the more reason why it was so precious. Her home was indeed something beautiful, almost as beautiful as the blessed souls that inhabited it. With impressive speed, Twilight reached the familiar territory of her destination, within only half an hour. She made a note to record her time when she returned to Canterlot, if only to compare with the time taken on previous trips. Twilight supposed that she had never managed to shake the competitive nature Rainbow had instilled in her. Twilight spotted her journey's end from a distance, its distinctive homely shape unmissable amongst the darkness, at least to Twilight's keen eyes. In the outcrop of a hill lay a stately cottage, not but a few miles from Ponyville, though it was more of a city than a village now. It was a cozy 2-story tall homestead, but its stature befitted the comfortable country living many ponies found fashionable these days. The cottage had a single chimney that puffed out gentle white smoke into the night sky. Its windows were illuminated by a warm orange light. Twilight sighed as she landed before short stone pillars with a black iron gate that served as the entrance to the cottage estate grounds. The postbox had fallen over again. She raised it back into place. She would need to bring some nails the next time, she noted before pushing the gate open. After a short trip up the cobbled pathway, Twilight was greeted by the door and the words emblazoned onto it. "Speak, friend, and enter." Twilight smiled as she pushed through the door, where she was greeted by the sound of laughter. The house was warm, in pleasant contrast to the chilly outside. Twilight followed the noise to the living room, which was the first room to the right after the doorway. She peeped into the living room, eager to see what commotion was all about.
A giraffe? The invention of the wheel?
Shouted Discord with exasperation.
A coffee cup! A piece of cake! Work with us, Tia!
Boomed Luna.
Anti-establishment Monterianism? Oh, I give up!
Shouted Discord in defeat. Twilight turned to find Celestia standing before a small fireplace. A board was to her left with various scribbles drabbled all over it. She was making wild gestural movements that were incomprehensible to the younger princess. There were sets of couches before Twilight, with Cadence and Flurryheart lounged on the left couch, while Discord and Luna adamantly shouted at Celestia on the other couch. to the immediate right. After a few seconds, a small alarm clock rang loudly on the nearby coffee table. It was the School of Friendship, puffed Celestia angrily. Luna and Discord sat mouths agape in disbelief and exasperation.
Booyah!
Roared Flurry as she thrust a hoof into the air. Cadence's reaction was more muted, merely smiling triumphantly. As Celestia returned to the couch, she was subject to angry glares from the Lord of Chaos and Lunar Princess.
I believe that's Team Crystal Heart 5 and Team Chocolate Milk Sundae 4.
Flurry leaned back in her seat, her face sporting an ear-to-ear grin.
Game, set, and match!
Sister, you're terrible at this, protested Luna, snorting distressingly. If you two knew how to play, said Celestia glumly.
Celestia, as the most imaginative person in existence, I can confirm that you are terrible at this game.
Lectured Discord, crossing his arms in a huff. You lost us the last round, snapped Celestia. Discord looked ready to argue some more before Twilight coughed lightly. Five heads swerved towards the hallway.
Twilight!
They cried in unison. The loss and triumph of the game were forgotten. At the arrival of their final guest, Cadence lifted herself from the couch. You're late again, said Cadence as she kissed Twilight's cheek and brought her into a hug, which Twilight gladly reciprocated. She frowned at the words, though. A princess arrives
Exactly when she means to.
The group collectively finished for her. Twilight let out a snort. Before long, the rest were off the couch, offering hugs and greetings in their own unique way. Discord swept into a hug that lifted Twilight off the ground before unceremoniously dumping her on the floor. Luna's bear hug was hearty, with much jovial laughter accompanying her hold. Finally, after Luna released her, Celestia and Twilight shared a tender embrace that reminded them both of the times long ago, when they were still but teacher and student. Celestia proudly smiled as she looked over Twilight. I will never get used to you being taller, whispered Celestia with a beaming smile. How do you think Luna feels? Gulped Twilight. The Lunar Princess stuck her tongue out in the direction, leading to another round of laughter amongst the group. Where's Spike? Asked Cadence, after they quieted. Where do you think? Asleep, said Twilight while rolling her eyes. Lately he's been more of the royal sleeper than the royal advisor.
I think our dragon friend is merely making excuses once more. Too afraid I'll kick his butt at some ogres and oubliettes.
Interjected Discord. I assure you he's eager for a rematch, replied Twilight, just as soon as he decides to stop lazying about. Flurry moved forward and bowed formally before her aunt. Twilight mirrored her niece's action. The two kept their prime facade for a moment more before they both broke into a fit of giggles. Flurry swept her aunt into a tight hold. Auntie, it's been too long! I can't even remember how many moons it's been, said Twilight, parting after what seemed like forever, yet still felt too short. How did you manage to get here from the Empire without causing a panic? Twilight reluctantly parted, keeping a hoof on her niece's shoulder. According to the courtiers, I'm on an important diplomatic mission, said Flurry with a fond, haughty tone, reminiscent of antique mannerisms of Empire. Twilight couldn't help but snigger. Really? How did you convince them of that? Well, you are technically a head of state, Auntie. How about you, Twilight? I am the Princess of Equestria. I do as I please, replied Twilight, drawing herself up to her impressive full height, her voice teeming with authority, despite her failing to hide the amusement in her tone. Oh, I'm so proud of you, sighed Luna lovingly. All right, dear leader. I believe we have a long overdue game to attend, said Celestia as she slapped Twilight's back with a hoof, gesturing for her to follow. The group had extracted themselves from the living room and had gradually moved into the neighbouring dining area, which featured a large table as its centerpiece. 5 seats surrounded the table, Cadence being the first to sit. Flurry took the spot to her left. Celestia and Luna sat together. Twilight occupied the head of the table closest to Celestia and Cadence, while Discord occupied the opposite side from her.
Come to lose your bits again, Celestia.
Crooned Discord as he flicked a bunch of cards between his palms. For a supposed master of manipulation, Discord, I don't recall you ever won a game, retorted Cadence. Looking somewhat smug, Discord shot a withering look.
I have one. I'll get back to you on that.
Discord stroked his beard in contemplation. Where have you been, anyway? Luring foals into your gingerbread house, no doubt? Huffed Luna sarcastically.
Excuse me? That is tasteless and rude,
said Discord as he jabbed a finger in her direction.
But the worst part of it is that it's cliché. Gingerbread is terrible. Every pony knows that.
Discord took a bite out of one of the cards.
My tastes are of a more exotic variety.
Faced with 5 unimpressed faces, Discord sighed and slumped his shoulders.
If you must know, I was flying through space in a metal ship piloted by apes.
A collective groan sounded out across the table, much to Discord's annoyance. Oh, not this again, interjected Celestia. You don't have to lie to us to hide the fact that you've been napping for the last 50 years.
No, I'm telling the truth,
he grumbled as he childishly crossed his arms. Flurry plucked the cards from Discord's paw and placed them before Twilight.
Twilight, you're the dealer.
She gently lifted the cards and began to shuffle them.
Why can't I deal?
Asked Luna. Because, Luna, we're not spending 10 minutes waiting for you to pull off some new card trick you've learned, muttered Celestia through her gritted teeth. Luna scowled and delivered a fierce kick beneath the table, which Celestia returned. As the sisters once again descended into another bout of quarrelling, which was so common at this point that the group had long stopped caring about it, Flurry returned her focus to the game at hoof.
I can't wait to get back to the Empire knowing I've won again,
she said as she leaned back in her chair.
3rd time's the charm. Discord, the chips, please.
Discord snapped his fingers, neatly summoning a pile of poker chips in the center of the table. Shining would never approve of you playing this game, said Cadence. She had never been particularly thrilled at her daughter's enjoyment of the game poker.
Who do you think taught me, Mom?
Cadence's mouth hung open in shock as the table rang out in laughter. I've missed this, said Twilight softly as she finished shuffling the cards. Her eyes scanned over the ponies and the single Draconequus present, and she could not help but feel a warmth in her chest. We did too, Twilight, said Celestia, as she extracted herself from a headlock.
Deal book, princess,
exclaimed Discord with impatience.
I know you bluff. You always squint when you have a decent hand.
Twilight looked back in bemusement at the chaos spirit. No, Discord, that's your tell, said Twilight with a deadpan expression.
No, it's not,
retorted Discord, far too quickly, now sporting a pair of sunglasses. Twilight moved to deal the cards, gently splitting them repeatedly as she looked over the table. She stopped for a moment, blinking to clear her eyes, and just for a brief moment, the ponies across from her were gone, and a familiar set of 5 faces sat in their places, smiling back at her. All of them looked as they did in their prime, as she remembered them from her first summer sun celebration in Ponyville. Even after all this time, she missed them so. Is something wrong, Twilight? Asked Celestia, as she rested a gentle, reassuring hoof on Twilight's shoulder. Twilight blinked and the table returned to normal, 4 alicorns and 1 Draconequus staring back at her expectantly. No. 5 good friends looking back at her. Twilight shook her head, a gentle smile gracing her lips. Some things never change. No. Everything's just perfect. And that was all good things. I must say, I really enjoyed this story. I'm glad my Patreons chose it. It was a bit difficult because of things been going on, as you know, with Visual being in rehab right now, and me visiting him, and so this was a bit of a rush job. I would have preferred to get some people on board playing Celestia, Luna, and all the others, but thank you so much to Brian, random, for jumping in for Discord. I know I sort of was like, I need a Discord, I can't do Discord's voice. No. So thank you so much for him. I will leave a link in his description, and thank you so much, everyone, for your support, and hope you all have a great, great day. Keep watching that moon! And a howling thank you to my Patreons.